Hello, everyone. My name is Mathew Rosengart. I'm a partner at the law firm of Greenberg Traurig in Los Angeles, and it's my pleasure today to introduce Ann Young Lee, one of the leaders of the great organization CORE, otherwise known as Community Organized Relief Effort. Ann Lee has 20 years of experience managing large-scale humanitarian response and sustainable development programming across a variety of sectors, including, most notably, emergency relief. Alongside Sean Penn in 2019 and co-founded CORE. And CORE had evolved essentially from an organization known as JPHRO, an organization founded by Sean Penn in 2010, following the devastating earthquake in Haiti, which killed up to about 250,000 Haitian citizens and others. During her time with CORE, Ann has overseen the organization's successful transition into an international response and resilience building NGO, responding to crises throughout the world, including Puerto Rico, across the Caribbean, in Latin America, India, Pakistan, continental United States, including Navajo Nation, and most recently and remarkably, Ukraine. Prior to joining CORE, Ann worked as the lead on urban humanitarian response for the UN's Organization for Coordination and Humanitarian Affairs, known as OCHA, and as a private liaison for the Secretary General's World Humanitarian Summit. All of this, again, impressively, all of CORE's work is with an eye toward helping minority populated, underserved communities throughout the country and, in fact, throughout the world. Ann holds a master's in urban planning from NYU and a master's in economics, conflict management from Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, and received the Society for International Development's prestigious Truman Award in May of 2009. And I've just scratched the surface on some of the amazing work Ann has done throughout her career and more recently with CORE. Ann, thanks for being with us this morning, and I really look forward to chatting.
Thank you so much, Matt. And that was the long version of the bio and makes me sound very old.
I cut it in half, Ann. I cut it in half, actually. And you've had truly an amazing career. What led to your initial interest in nonprofit and humanitarian relief work?
I can pinpoint exactly sort of the shift in trajectory in my life that brought me here. And it was living in New York in the Lower East Side when 9/11 happened. And I was working for a lawyer thinking I was going to go to law school when the two towers had fallen and I had watched the second one fall. And it was at that moment that I knew that I needed to do something more and something immediate, as so many of us did in response to what happened. And so for me, I quit my job and I went to a graduate program that would feed me directly into what I thought that I was going to go into, which was diplomacy. I wanted to be a diplomat and understand how conflict started and kind of do everything that I could to never let something like 9/11 happen. And then a series of events kind of led me to Kosovo and Pristina, working with minorities with the UN there. And that completely changed my life in that it brought me to the nonprofit sector and field work.
And let me fast forward because we could spend 20 minutes on just your amazing career through or up until co-forming CORE with Sean Penn. But let me jump ahead to that because it's so fascinating. The work has been so important and I'm sure so rewarding. You and Sean together formed CORE in 2019 after you spent time in Haiti. Tell us about your initial meeting with Sean in Haiti, and relatedly, whether you had any skepticism about this, albeit famous person, actor traveling to Haiti to help.
I mean, he'll never forgive me for this because the first interaction that we had, I think I must have had just like the worst look on my face. And, in my defense, I had lived in Haiti for about 4 years when the earthquake hit, and seeing so many people coming from outside to help was amazing. But at the same time, what was frustrating was seeing a lot of people who came down just to take photos and then leave without actually helping. And hearing, this really, Oscar-winning actor was coming down, and I needed to make time to meet with him and speak with him. It was quite frustrating. So I was not very nice, to say the least. And apparently behind my back, he was calling me the Korean ice princess. I'm actually making that a lot nicer than what he was actually calling me. So our first interaction was not necessarily the kindest. But after spending some time working in sort of geographically neighborhoods as we did, I saw him on the ground living in the displacement camp for 9 months. And it was probably in month 4 that we really got together and sat down and talked about some incredible ideas that he had. And we ended up just kind of working together and became thick as thieves.
Yeah, I remember, although I wasn't there at the time, obviously, at an event for, I think then JPHRO several years ago, Bill Clinton told the story about himself being skeptical, and then saying in Clinton's own inimicable way, Sean Penn lived in the mud. He slept in
Yeah.
a tent and lived in the mud for months. So far from it being a celebrity photo op, he really, literally, I hate the cliche, but he walked the walk. How long,
Mhm.
Ann, did you stay in Haiti initially after the earthquake?
Over 2 years. So
And
4 years before the earthquake and 2.5 years after.
and tell us about your experience on the ground, because now you're obviously an executive, and the work you do managing the organization, although you do field work as well, is remarkable and of crucial importance, especially as a minority woman. It's all the more impressive. But tell us about your work in the field, on the ground, starting with Haiti, the devastation that you saw, and also how you kept your spirits up in light of seeing that devastation.
Haiti, I think, has been a huge shift, not just for us as an organization and a foundation for our organization, but it was really a modern disaster of its kind for the humanitarian community, in that its large scale impact was in a very complex urban area that also had layers of difficulty, right? It had, lack of infrastructure, lack of government capacity, and a lot of insecurity. So working in an urban environment was very, very difficult. And all of our systems as an international response community wasn't, and still is not, fit to respond well to these complex crises. And so for us, it was such a huge turning point, or for Sean and I, in that it gave us almost this incredible room and freedom to kind of think out of the box. I think that having somebody like Sean, who's such an outside thinker, who is coming from the outside, and me, who is so built into the system, we found this incredible complementarity that allowed us to kind of do things way outside of the norm and really paved the way for other organizations in the space that we were in. So just to give you context, right, reminding people, 200,000 people died in the earthquake, and it spread through, 3 major cities. The streets were completely clogged. You couldn't drive a car down a street because the buildings had fallen into the street. So no, even if you had assistance, even if you had emergency food or fuel or whatever, you couldn't get people to hospitals or even traverse the roads. You had to carry people over the rubble to get materials and people safely to areas. And it was even up to, I think, month 9 that we were still recovering bodies from the rubble. It was incredibly overwhelming. And then on top of that, you had thousands of organizations that jumped in with very little coordination. And it did not make the situation very easy. So I think coming out of that, the things that really have laid the pieces, the cornerstones for our organization, is partnership, taking risks, and thinking outside of the box. And sort of, I think the biggest pieces is not letting the impossibility of a task stop you from doing what you feel and see is important. So when you had experts talking about it's going to be 50 years before all of this rubble is going to be taken away, the city's going to be chock full of rubble for the next 5, 6 generations. Sean and I essentially, we just said, well, we might as well get started. And so we started removing the rubble using heavy equipment, but in some cases, literally by hiring people to take down buildings by hand. We didn't wait for something, outsiders or, experts or whoever to come in and do this. We said, this is a problem. We're going to do what we can. Just get started, which is what we did. We had to drown out the noise of why should it be us? We don't have the expertise in rubble removal. And we just started. And I have to tell you, we moved all of that rubble, I think collectively about, 500,000 cubic meters of rubble, and cleared out all of Port-au-Prince, not just us, but we initially started it, shared all of our learnings, and got all these other groups to come in and do it. And we're able to clear out Port-au-Prince within 4 years. So that gave us this huge learning of drown out that noise, take the risks, and just shut the F up and just pick up a shovel and get started.
And put one foot in front of the other. But this is almost more of a personal question. What inspired you to do it every day? Do you just put blinders on and literally put one foot in front of the other? Or is there some greater inspiration or depth to your thinking? I mean, you're literally seeing incredible devastation, which can be depressing. You're seeing dead bodies and you're there to help. And CORE is still in Haiti more than a decade later. Where do you find the strength and the inspiration to keep doing it back then through today?
It always comes from the people who are living the crisis. Having been with the community and being with our staff in Haiti when it happened, seeing that, for example, knowing that one of our community mobilizers had lost 2 kids, one who was an infant, but was still coming into work every single day to make sure that we had food, make sure that we were getting the work out. You can't not, do something when you see that. And we see that in every single place, every single disaster that we respond to. It's the people who are and have lost that are the ones that are just up and driving and compelled. And the support that we can give to that, how we can leverage that, how we can, basically augment that. They're the inspiration that gets us up in the morning every single day, and the stories that they tell, that despite losing family members, losing everything, that they're still picking up every day to help each other is just, it's inspirational.
It reminds me of a line which I won't get exactly correct, but from the Talmud, which says, if you can help one person, if you can help one human being, that's a lifetime's work. But
Mhm.
CORE has literally saved numerous lives, which you can't even quantify. So let me fast forward to CORE's more recent work in connection with COVID. CORE, and I've had some personal experience with this, obviously, was at the forefront, at the vanguard of fighting COVID. And it seems quaint now, but when COVID really began, when it was most prevalent or became prevalent here in the first quarter of 2020, it really was a war. People
Mhm.
were literally dying on the streets throughout the country and throughout the world, not to over dramatize it. It's easy to look back now and forget that. What was the genesis of your and Sean's involvement and CORE's involvement in fighting COVID, initially in Los Angeles and then throughout the country?
It was happening in our own backyards, and we were watching it unfold, as you remember. And it was specifically watching the Koreans set up those drive-through testing sites and those telephone booth testing sites. And I looked at that and I called Sean and I was like, well, every day we were talking about like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to get involved? How can we help? And I told him like, we got to get into this. We got to get into testing. If they can do it, we can do it. You know, we can figure this out. And so we had found this doctor in Huntington Beach who was in the LA Times and was doing like maybe 50 tests you know, in his parking lot of his clinic. And so we went there and we said, teach us everything that you know. And so we decided we're going to buy 2,000 test kits, have set up a relationship with the lab, and let's just start. Again, with no medical director, no prior history in major medical response in the United States. And we just jumped in. And we had, again, this incredible group of donors and board members like Soleil and who connected us to the mayor's office. The mayor's office asked us to come through rather than, you know, having something as an offshoot, to come in and help him with a testing site that the fire department was setting up. And when we got there, the fire department was telling us, you know, we need to get our guys out on the streets to respond to medical cases. Can you run this site? So the first day we had, you know, me and 10 people that I could just wrangle up, and we said, yes, we're going to do this. And then when it ran successfully, you know, they said, can you pick up 3 more sites in 3 days? And of course, you know, straight faced, I was like, of course. And so that led to us running about, I would say 15 sites, mass sites in Los Angeles, and including Dodger Stadium, as well as another 10 mobile units. And that also spread out across the United States to 6 other cities, to also Navajo Nation. And then we ended up essentially doing about 7 million tests and 3 million vaccines, because we then switched over to vaccines as soon as they were available.
So CORE was working essentially with the city of LA and the LA Fire Department. And by mobilizing, for example, at Dodger Stadium, which I think was the largest testing and then vaccination site in the country, it freed up the LAFD or LAFD firemen and first responders to do their work in the field to the extent CORE was able to sort of take over responsibilities that they would be involved in. Is that generally right?
Exactly. And there's no way that they could have scaled up to do the number of tests as well. I mean, we essentially were able to mobilize and hire up close to, I think, over, I don't know, 1,500 employees and volunteers in Los Angeles in a very short period of time, which is, as you can imagine, very difficult for government to do. And that proved to be a very important model across the United States. And that is where I find where we play such a critical role in partnership with government agencies and with other partners. You know, we have a higher tolerance of risk and we can actually move a lot faster. We need to kind of play that role in that critical few days, hours, weeks, and months until the other groups can kind of scale up and you know, match their sometimes clunky systems to be able to respond to a crisis. And so we fit a very, very important niche in that space.
So the audience has a perspective. Approximately how many employees and volunteers did CORE have prior to COVID? Do you
We
remember? It
had
was
7,
relatively low. How many?
7, 7
7
US based,
employees. And then
7 US based employees. Yeah,
at the apex of COVID, how many employees did CORE
we had
have?
3,000.
And that growth took place in a matter of months. Is that right?
That's correct. And that was in the peak of COVID testing in 2020. We were testing 60,000 people per day. That's per day. And that
It's
was at,
incredible.
yeah.
And the operation, you mentioned having conversations with the mayor. Mayor Garcetti, that would be, this also had the support of the state, right? It was a local operation.
Hmm.
There were conversations with the governor as well. Is that right? And were you
That's right.
involved in those?
Yes, all of those. And that's what actually led us to spread out to Bakersfield as well as to Oakland, where we still are to this day.
And I think you said something like 7 million tests were administered and
That's right.
about 3 million vaccinations.
Hmm.
It's
Yes.
remarkable. It's hard to quantify, but CORE literally saved lives during the COVID pandemic. After the Dodger operation was demobilized, for lack of a better word, did CORE focus on other disaster relief areas? I mean, you're never in want for business. The business,
Hmm.
unfortunately, comes to you. So, what became your primary focus and the organization's focus after COVID started to dissipate?
So, as with so many disasters, those the shocks that create those disasters really uncover these longstanding, protracted crises that have been happening. And so, what COVID did was really show us, the really failed access to health that a lot of communities have. And so, one of the things that we've been focusing in on is health access in the communities that we initially mobilized for COVID relief. So, we always targeted communities of color and communities who have high social vulnerability indices. So, we're still in those areas, again, working with departments of health, providing access to health. The other areas that we've been focusing in on is kind of going back to our original mission, which is focusing on disaster relief, not just for climate change impacts, but also um, the war in Ukraine.
Tell us about that. How did you initially mobilize in Ukraine? And tell us about your first visit to Ukraine and how it all started.
So Ukraine was an interesting spot for me and Sean. Sean had been working on a documentary on the president before the war had started. And so he was
We
already
should say
there.
not President Trump, President Zelensky.
Oh, sorry, President Zelensky. And so when the war started, we jumped in right away, I think within the first few days of the war. And then we started out in Poland. And for us, it was really important because, we've been focusing so much on climate refugees. This was a situation born out of war. And so situating ourselves in Poland gave us sort of a first step into getting into Ukraine. We ended up supporting about 83 shelters in Ukraine, in Poland, as well as Romania. And that was helping support a huge body of really informal shelters. We're talking about, families that were taking in like, 20 families, and a hotel that switched over that was taking in 50 families who had never done this before. And they needed a lot of support with materials, but also how do we keep women and girls safe, making, because the majority of the refugee population were the elderly, women and children. And so we focused a lot on that, but we quickly switched over to responding within Ukraine and working on two fronts, essentially providing immediate support to the recently liberated areas on the front lines with fuel, food, whatever's needed, medicine, whatever's needed on the front lines, but then also supporting the internally displaced persons within Ukraine. And we still continue to support the refugees in Poland and Romania.
And Dan, how many times have you personally been over to Ukraine overseeing the operation?
Oh, I would say probably about half a dozen times, a few of them with Sean, which is a completely interesting, different experience.
Does any story stand out in regard to being there with or without Sean in terms of, the war zone effectively that you were in? You were literally in a war zone. So tell us
Yeah,
what comes to mind in regard to what you saw and how it impacted you.
I think the most impactful moment was with our translator. Andre, who took us to a recently liberated community that had a school. And he took us to the school that was pockmarked with a lot of, that had taken a lot of artillery. And he took us inside the school where about 200 Ukrainians were held in the basement without any amenities for over 2 months. And it was quite horrific. And also visiting the graves of the folks that did not make it there. Essentially, the Ukrainians were being used as human shields for the army. And him telling the story was was so it was so powerful in the sense where it was still happening. This is very sort of, it was 8 months ago. So this is earlier on in the war. And he was saying that, this is my last job as a interpreter because I'm going to the front. I'm old, but I have some training, and there's no way that anyone's going to stop me from fighting because I need to do this for my future, my family, and for my country. And I get this from our country director, Liana. There's not a single person that we speak to that doesn't have a story, a personal story of loss, and more so than the loss, it's just this absolute dedication that there's no way that they're ever going to stop fighting for their homeland and for their children. Liana immediately left Ukraine with her kids as soon as the war broke out. And as soon as her kids were dropped with family that were safe, she drove right back because she knew that she needed to take part in protecting her country and her future and the future of her children. So when you see that type of absolute dedication and unity, it's overwhelming, especially coming from the United States, where we feel a lot less of that given our politics, in the face of such adversity.
You spoke about this a little bit earlier, Anne, but I gather you take inspiration, and how could you not, as a human being, from what you see on the ground? What are the challenges more broadly in regard to keeping up the morale of core employees and staff under such dire circumstances in the field, whether it's Haiti, COVID, Ukraine, Caribbean disasters, et cetera? I mean, you guys are literally running into the storm, running into war zones. You've spoken about your personal inspiration, but how do you, as a leader, keep your staff's morale high and keep them motivated?
I think, what's incredible is that because we hire from the communities that we are supporting and that are affected, they are constantly the ones that are fueling us, the leadership as well as the donors. I think it's really donors and the general public that need a lot more sort of, I don't know, we need to light a fire because I think that there's this huge sense of sort of apathy and just exhaustion from everything that's happening in the world, and this feeling of like, you know, what can we do? It's just it's too much, and it's happening everywhere. And I get that so much from a lot of folks that I talk to, that they don't know even what a small, dollar, or what little thing that they can do is actually going to contribute to this mountain of problems that we have in the world. I never get that from our staff. Our staff are like, okay, what more can we do? I have this great idea, and they're constantly invigorated. They're the ones that are on the ground day to day, seeing these daily miracles happening, and they're part of that, and they're part of that community, and seeing and being part of that change. That I think most of the sort of support that needs to go for morale is external, and it goes back to what I started with in terms of, yeah, and the immensity of like, yeah, it's going to take 50 years before you remove any piece of rubble, or COVID is all around the world, and this is going to be our new reality, and how are you going to test so many people? It's like, well, just shut up and just start, just start, and you can actually make a difference, you know? So it's that message that I think needs to get out to external folk. Internally, we have the most incredibly motivated, incredibly inspired staff um, that I'm really grateful to.
And getting the message out is one reason I was so happy to do this webinar today. Let me step back and talk about CORE again more generally. You talked about CORE filling a niche. Can you explain what you meant by that and how CORE is different from other NGOs? For example, CORE is still more than a decade later on the ground in Haiti, and as I understand it, run essentially by Haitian citizens. So why is it that CORE is still on the ground in Haiti? And what distinguishes CORE from other NGOs, both in Haiti and really throughout the country and throughout the world?
I would say that for us, Haiti, again, was so foundational in who we are that we have our roots there that we will always keep. And we learn from them every single day. Just their doggedness and their incredible strength is pretty inspiring. For us, I think our niche has been not just to enter quickly and fill that gap before other partners and other larger groups can kind of, get their bearings and get started. We also do things that are sort of proof of concept. We're very, very much a learning organization. So everything that we did during the post-earthquake moments of removing all that rubble, we recorded everything, all the steps that it takes, the costs, how many staff you need, what that looks like. And we shared that out to everyone to ask for people to join into it. And it was the same thing with testing and vaccination. We were very conscious to record everything, how you set up, how much does it cost, what do you need. We participated in 5 different national groups to kind of increase the amount of testing for other organizations to jump in. I think we play this niche in that we can take the greater risks and then do the proof of concept for other people to come in and kind of increase the impact and hopefully get to a tipping point. And that's what we pride ourselves in. But I do have to say, the only reason why we can take these risks is because of really unique donors and folks like you, Matt, and your law firm that gives us so much sort of support and understanding that, okay, we know that you need to take these greater risks, but this is how we do it safely. And this is how we do it with calculated risks, with understanding what the costs are. And giving us that foundation to be able to do that within that framework is, I think, what has allowed us to be where we are. So that's why I'm so grateful to you, Matt.
And we're grateful to you, Anne, and what CORE does. CORE doesn't pay for itself. I mean, the incredible life-saving work that the organization does throughout the world has to be funded. So you talked about donors. Who are some of the leading donors, and what does CORE do, and what does CORE need to continue to do to not only survive but thrive and help people on the ground in disaster relief areas and in war zones?
So the majority of our funding, interestingly enough, is from large institutions, government institutions, the UN. So American Red Cross, the US government through USAID, and the Department of Health, and so on and so forth. What's interesting is that it's a larger portion of our funding, but the more weightier portion is going to be actually privatized donations, because it's those institutions that come in later and they take time before that they can give. But it's the private donations, even though it's a smaller percentage of our budget, it's actually weightier in that it's the private donors like Jack Dorsey and a number of other very, very giving individuals that essentially let us take those risks and allow us to do the things in the proof of concepts that will then show the larger institutions, oh, this is the right way to do it, let's take it to scale. So the private donations mean a huge amount to us, and that's why it's important for us to continue getting the information out of the good work that we're doing.
And let me just end with a few more general questions as well about you personally. You've spoken so eloquently about CORE and the work that CORE does. What achievement in your career, and don't get upset with me because you're modest, are you most proud of? There are so many to choose from, but what stands out?
I think by far it's COVID. I think the impact that we made during that time is really the thing that I can die remembering, saying I was part of something bigger than anything that I could have even dreamed of. It was global, it was a historic moment, and I know that we played a huge role in impacting not just lives, but also just understanding that we're never going to get out of this through one sector alone. Government's never going to do this alone. NGOs can't do this alone. And we really had this body of partners that came together in this incredible way that is really hard to replicate. And being a part of that was, I think, the best thing I've ever done in my life.
And you were not only part of it, but you were one of the leaders, and you knew nothing, I assume, of pandemics and the science behind it.
Nothing.
No experience, and you guys literally started from scratch.
And I think that's what we're good at. I think, I don't know if it's, just the ignorance of not being afraid of the things that we don't know, or if it's also just realizing that really not the experts aren't going to figure out the way out of this. Everything at the end of the day becomes operational. How can you mobilize and operationalize things? You can have the experts kind of, drive the technical piece to it. But in every place that we've ever worked in COVID, where it was the most effective is when operational people were given free rein to really set up and run. And I think that that's something that we're really good at. We're able to figure things out operationally very quickly.
Right. And as Sean said, and sometimes as a lawyer, conservative lawyer, I don't love it, but core is almost like a plane that continues to build itself after takeoff, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
And core continues to do that. So let me end with these two questions, Anne. Um, Over the course of your career, but I suppose with a focus on core, um, what have been your greatest challenges, both personally and as an organization?
I think that personally, it's been the work life balance. I think this is an all consuming calling, one that essentially does not leave room for much else. And the lines between personal and private become personal and work kind of get blurred very quickly. So that's something that I think is difficult, but at the same time, having a network and family that understands that is so important. I think for the organization, one of the difficult points for us and the hardest points for us is that, having been in a very visible space, we've learned very quickly that it is very much in the zeitgeist to um, draw not just positive attention, but negative attention. And being somebody who has worked so hard on turning away money and turning away things that we don't believe in because we want to do it the right way, and integrity is very important to us. Um, Having our reputation sometimes being, attacked or questioned, I take it personally. And it unfortunately, in now having experienced a little bit of life and a little bit of this work, speaking to the other experts, like, Gail McGovern from American Red Cross and, somebody, a very high level UN official, and all these incredible people who have done this work. It's not new, and it's not, unfortunately, it's not unique. And so, as you've told me many times, Matt, it is the cost of doing the business that we do. It's the tax that we have to pay, and that always sticks with me. And for me, it's so worth the cost. It's a tax that I'm happy to pay to be able to do the things that we did in COVID, to do the things that we did in Haiti, and to continue to do the things that we're doing around the world. I mean, we're in 27 different places right now, from Maui to Pakistan to India to, all over the United States. So I'm happy to pay that tax.
And let me just end with this. I'll combine two questions into one. You touched on what you found most rewarding or what stands out, and I think your response was COVID, and it's hard to separate, I think one area or one moment from the next. But tell us about some of your most satisfying moments as a leader of CORE.
Wow, I think one of the most satisfying moments was seeing an area that Sean and I worked on in Haiti 10 years, again, because we've been there for over 13 years now, and visiting the community there and having people remember my name and our name and say, like, look at my house now. I've sent my kids to school, and just seeing not just the immediate impact that we made during that period of time, but that we made a generational impact. That to me is it's incredible and something that I don't take for granted.
And I think we've run out of time, but I just want to thank you on behalf of the Beverly Hills Bar Association, where I'm fortunate enough to be a member of the Board of Governors, and really just as a citizen, I want to thank you for all of your work. Thank you for being my friend, and thank you for inspiring all of us. And thanks for your time today.
Oh, thank you so much. And Matt, thank you for letting us stand on your shoulders to protect us and for everything that you do.
Thanks, Ann.
Take care.